Moshe Taragin, Parshas Nitzavim, for the OU All Parsha video series. An iconic Parsha with many iconic psukim. And very often we read it, just turn this off, very often we read it along with Vayelech, and it's a little bit rushed, and it's pre-post Rosh Hashanah. This year we read it slowly, by itself, standalone, Atem Nitzavim, excuse the pun, Kol Chem Hashem Elokechem, Rashechem, Shiftechem, Zekechem, V'Shotrechem, Kol Ish Yisrael. I want to talk about a different part of the parsha, a different section, the Kol Ki HaMitzvah Zos section, and the iconic pasuk in that section. Ki HaMitzvah Zos, Asher Nachim Savchayam, Lo Nefleisim, Chav Lo Rechoki, Lo B'Shamayim. That phrase, Lo B'Shamayim, Lo Me'ever Le'am, but particularly Lo B'Shamayim, is a pasuk, or part of a pasuk, that means three different things at once. And of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has enough chachma to write a pasuk can mean 70 or 7,000 things at once. But that phrase is pregnant, that phrase is elastic. It leads us in three different pathways of how we think about Torah, how we think about Midos, and how we think about our Masara. So let's start from the beginning. First of all, Lo B'Shamayim, he is probably most well known as a empowering of human beings to craft Torah Sheba'al Peh. And Torah Sheba'al is immutable. Torah Sheba'al is the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, period. Eish Shechara, Agabe Eish Levana, black fire on white fire. Kol Os, Kol Kutza Shel Yud was clearly dictated by the Rebbeinu Shalom to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, what style Hashem spoke to Moshe in? Was Moshe adding this or that? That's already famous Even Ezra, which most of our Masar doesn't accept in Sefer Devarim, but Moshe mipi hagavura Amar. Torah Sheba'al Peh is a bris. It's a union. Torah Sheba'al Peh is a bilateral experience. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us this unending world of thought that innervates and penetrates every part of the human condition. And we're meant to try to discover it, to articulate it, to apply it, to compare and contrast it. Torah Sheba'al Peh, Yavan Davar Mitoch Davar, Yaskol Davar Me, Reishis Davar Me, Acharisos, the Rambam writes when he talks about analytics in Torah Sheba'al Peh. And that's theoretically the way we see Torah Sheba'al Peh. But not only theoretically, but practically the way we apply Torah Sheba'al Peh. When we learn Gemara, we're trying to find as many options as possible. There's no right or wrong. Hashem told Moshe that an object is Tameh, and he told him it's Tahar, and it can be both true because Hashem isn't binary. It doesn't think in yes or no. However, when it comes to practice, we either have to treat that sheretz as a Tameh or a Tahar. We can only make Kiddush one way, even though every model of Kiddush, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel's Kiddush, is true because it represents a different concept of Shabbos based on the sequencing of brachos. And even in the halachic realm, where there's less flexibility, there's only one way we can behave, and you think, well, maybe there Hashem bangs down the gavel, says this is the way you're going to make Kiddush, this is the way. Well, we know that Achrei Rabim Lahatos, and the famous moment in our history where Achrei Rabim Lahatos and the empowerment of man to determine halacha, based on this pasuk, Lo B'Shamayim, was in the story discussed in the Gemara of Metzia, the Tana Shalachnai, Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer Horkinus. So somehow in the first century, around that time is when this happened. Big machlokas between the Tanoim about a reconstituted oven, whether it's Makabel Tumah. The kids that Rabbi Eliezer says it was not Makabel Tumah. All the other Tanoim disagreed, and you all know the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer Ben Horkinus summoned supernatural miracles and omens and trees levitating or waters flowing backwards, the walls of the base medrash caving in, just to prove that he was right, and that the majority of the Chachamim shouldn't be followed. And now we're at a standstill, and then a bas kol comes out from Shemayim, telling everyone to listen to Rabbi Eliezer Ben Horkinus, and I think it was Rabbi Yeshua. He banged his fist on the table, and he said, Lo B'Shamayim, we don't follow heavenly rulings, we don't follow the psak of Shemayim. So it's not just that when we're exploring the labyrinth of Hashem's world and his mind, that we use human cognition and not supernatural divination. But even when we iron out psak, which is binary, which is unilateral, which is one-dimensional, Lo B'Shamayim. Now, the truth is, there's a lot to speak about that because not everyone agreed with the hard version. The hard version is the Rambam. The Rambam believes Lo B'Shamayim. We don't accept any supernatural input. That's not always true in the Rishonim. The Rabbi talks about being visited, famous Rabbi in Hilchos Sukkah about Lulav being visited by, I think, Eliyahu Hanavi, in his base manager being told certain truths. There was a sefer of Tshuvas written called Tshuvas Min HaShamayim. I think it was the son of the Rosh. Not son of the Rosh. It was a contemporary of the Rosh, who went to Shemayim and had dreams in the base in Shlomallah, and they told him certain psakalachas which he brought down, and especially in certain other masoras, people did rely on whether it's Eliyahu Hanavi, whether it's a Baskal, whether they, and again, they're not all the same. There's a big difference between relying on a Baskal, relying on Eliyahu Hanavi, relying on Ruach HaKodesh, relying on some other way, which of course raises the point where we had a steady stream of Ruach HaKodesh in the first Beis HaMikdash. What role did the Urim Turim play, not just in strategic questions like going to war, not going to war, but let's say Elazar ben Horkinus had gone to the Urim Turim and asked the Urim Turim whether he was right. Let's say the Urim Turim would have said he was right. Would that have been Lama Shemayimi? That's not the purpose of this year. It's too many details. But it establishes human beings at the root of the Torah process, and not equally important, but important as well, establishes the capacity that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us to use our ration to analyze the system. Because I don't have supernatural capabilities. I don't have the ability to summon secrets from beyond. I have rational analytic capabilities, and outside from how it changes the complexion of Torah, although there's nothing more important than that, it also changes the type of people we are, because we're so involved in studying Torah, and because Torah ends up being a rational-centered experience rather than a supernatural. What do the angels say? So Jews become very rational, and that leads to so many parts of Jewish identity. What's the practicality to make it through Galus, the practicality to know how to deal with our surroundings, which were hostile, whether it was just the fact that we trained our brains, we were very literate in a world which unfortunately was suffering from illiteracy, mass illiteracy. And then as science takes hold of the scientific revolution of the latter part of the past millennia, Jews are at the forefront, because this is right up our alley. We've been doing this forever. We've been using our brains and our minds to analyze the Word of Hashem. Now that we've been unleashed and unchained from the ghetto, and that the human mind in general has been unfettered by religious dogma, not that Judaism ever had dogma, but Christians suppressed human imagination. Now that everyone's starting to think, let's think as well. And so Lo Bashamayim is not just what happens when there's machlokas about an oven, nor is it just whether we trust Eliyahu Hanavi to come give us a chiddush about an arava. Lo Bashamayim is an orientation. And the orientation stems from the way we process Torah Hashem, but it radiates towards our overall national character. The second interpretation of Lo Bashamayim is the Gemara in Eruvin. And it speaks not to how we process Torah, but it speaks to what type of moral impact we want Torah to have on people. We believe that studying the Word of Hashem has to change a person morally, and if it doesn't, then it's not really be studying the right way. Because it's Dvar Hashem, that's the famous mission of Rabbi Meir in Pirkei Avos. If a person learns Torah Lishma, he's Zalchel L'Dvarim Harbein. There's this huge list, and it's a very comprehensive list, and it's a list that far surpasses any of the Musar Svarim lists. You want a list of character traits to aspire to and to try to work on. It must be 30 or 40 traits I've encountered recently. And this all stems from Talmud Torah. That's why the original Rosh Yeshivas were opposed to the learning of Musar, because why should you dedicate specific time to study religious, moral texts? Just study another Tosfos, and hopefully the encounter with the Devar Hashem will be morally salutary to the person studying. And of course, in an ideal world it is, but the world changed in the 19th century. Certainly in our century, we can't assume it as an automatic. That studying a Tosfos in Bava Kama will lead to moral sensibility or ethical integrity. But we want that to be true, and we want to use that as a litmus, and I think we should use it as a litmus. So we ask ourselves, of all the traits, that trait of Rabbi Meir in the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos, of all the traits that we expect Torah to create, which is the cardinal trait, and which trait, if it's lacking, should we say, well, there's a fatal flaw in that person's Torah study. Namely, we expect a whole menu of traits, but not everyone's perfect, not everyone can excel in those traits. But what is the cardinal trait in general for moral behavior, and in particular that we expect Torah to create? It's not the same question, but the answer is the same, and that's anava, and that's humility. It is the gateway to all of the traits. Egav anava yiras Hashem, Shlomo Melech writes. Humility is a trait that will caress moral behavior. It will soften human identity. It will create selflessness, lack of self-interest, lack of pettiness, lack of jealousy. So it's not just some trick that Hashem pulled off the contingent to other traits. It's really true developmentally, experientially. But we also expect that to be the trait that Torah produces, and if not, then there's something wrong about Torah. Not only because Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest Talmid Chacham that ever lived, was the greatest Anav, because it's de facto, it's implicit, because true humility is not self-abnegation or self-denial, but seeing the sweep and the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, encountering the immutable beyond the infinite. So you can believe in your talents and know what you accomplish and have self-esteem, but when you encounter the Bonus Shalom, it frames it so miniature, as Avram says. And therefore, if we see someone that has no humility, it's not thinking about how deeply they're studying Torah, and it's not all or nothing. The more humble the person is, the more we believe Torah wisdom is sinking into their persona. Now, I have to say, and I always say this to the boys when I teach them about this, it's important to say this to the people that are listening, the expressions of humility differ from culture to culture. So just recently, Rav Meidan, who's a huge Rosh Hashiva of Yeshivat Har Etzion, a well-known personality in Eretz Yisrael, probably the world's expert on Tanakh. If you don't know him, try to get to know him. He's an Ish Kadosh. Fortunately, his son was injured in the war. He was taken, seriously injured, Elisha Yehuda Ben Ruti. There was a picture taken of him visiting soldiers on their way to battle, and there were two parts to that picture. One part of the picture, maybe I'll put the picture on this video, one part of the picture was him sitting with Chayalim on the way to war, teaching them, I think, finishing Harias, whatever they were learning, but it's a beautiful picture, but we've seen those pictures. The other one was him sitting on the floor, I think in his army fatigues, or he's past 70s, so I can't believe in his army fatigues, but sitting on the floor with the soldiers. Either they didn't have chairs or the soldiers were sitting on the floor. So I think you could look at that one of two ways. The way I was trained, my world, is that Rabbanim are not supposed to hold themselves at a distance, and they're not supposed to direct or try to attract kavod and honor, and that's why in the Beis Medrash I dress down. I don't even wear a white shirt in the Gush Beis Medrash I worked with. But Lechabe, the Americans, who probably would be very awkward seeing a rabbi without a beard, without a hat, and not wearing a white shirt. So it's just cultural mores. It's what is accepted in your world. And the world that I was trained in, and the Rabbanim that I saw, Rav Lichtenstein, Rav Amital, were self-deflecting. They didn't want attention drawn to themselves. They tried to be quiet and unassuming. They tried to be humble and normal. Basically, the goal is that a Rebbe should be no different than anyone else in shul. And that's when he was to shul, not in Beis Medrash. And just, that's his job. And the kavod is the kavod HaTorah, the kavod Rebbe. But we all know that between that and many other gradations, and many Rabbanim who demand kavod, it's not because they're egocentric. It's because the traditions that they operate within demand that the Rabbanim hold themselves in a certain stature, so that there's a palpable and concrete icon for kavod Torah. And you know what's right and wrong. You know the answer by now. There's no right or wrong. Each one has perils, and each one has positives. Each one has advantages, and each one has assets and disadvantages. So, but the orientation, and we know, if you train your eye, you can tell someone who is self-aggrandizing, self-interest, self-centered, which are different deficiencies of humility, or someone that tries to put themselves on the side and take themselves out of the equation and just be substantive and deliver Torah to Hashem. So that's the second meaning of Lo B'Shamayim. The first meaning is rationalist approach to Torah, to analysis, to halacha, and beyond, spreading and affecting Jewish identity. The second meaning is morally. Lo B'Shamayim. Torah will not be found with those who are in the heavens, whose egos are in the heavens. But God said, Ruach B'Shamayim. It's either the Gemara in Eruvin and Dalet, or it's in Medrash. I forget where, in maybe my Midbar. I think it's in Eruvin and Dalet. I just got off of the plane. I realized I didn't record this, and it's already Monday night, so I didn't get a chance to look up this farm. The third meaning of Lo B'Shamayim is not how we process Torah, and not about the moral impact the Torah is meant to have, but it is a reassurance, and that's why it's in Parshas Nitzavim. Parshas Nitzavim is a reassuring parsha. Atem Nitzavim Hayam Kol Chem Le'Hashem L'Chem. After everything's been said and done, and all the 40 years, and all the death, and all the clothes, that's first Rashi Nitzavim, you're here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Rachamim, Bala Rachamim, Shomer Tefillah, Racham V'Chanun. Yes, there's punishment. Yes, there's consequence. Yes, religion's hard, but ultimately Hashem doesn't. Hashem wants people to live, and Hashem is forgiving, and Hashem allows us. I'll tell a joke. My father, if he ever listens to this, he'd be thrilled that I'm telling this joke, because he has a whole roster of jokes that he gets particular delight about. Three men who were thrown into Gehenna. A Chabad Chassid, and a Rav Nachman Chassid, Breslov Chassid, and a boy from Yeshiva. So at some point the Rebbe comes down to Gehenna, pulls up the Chabad Chassid by his gartel. I know you're a sinner, but come with me, I'll take you to Gan Eden. Then Rav Nachman comes, pulls up his Talmud by his kapada, by his payas, pulls him up to Shemayim. I know you had a hard life, you sinned, but come with me to Shemayim. Mashgiach of the yeshiva comes and sees his Talmud in Gehenna, and he says, I told you so. Sometimes the tone that we take with religion and striving for religion can be an I told you so, and harsh and unforgiving and foreboding, and these are the standards. And Parshas Nitzavim in general is not that. And in particular, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us, as hard as it may seem, and we'll see what the it is in a moment, it can seem intimidating, it can seem hard, seem difficult. Without all the other pshat and all the other meanings, which Baruch was telling us. Now, what is the it that's karvelecha? So the Pashto says, Kim mitzvah means everything I've taught you, Moshe Rabbeinu says, the entire Kol Torah Kula. And Hashem is saying, Talmud Torah would seem hard, mitzvahs would seem hard, but lo b'shamayim. And of course, my Rabbi Lichtenstein, who was great at reassuring, but even better at making demands, and that was really, to me at least, his core DNA. So he said, yeah, but if you read the pasuk carefully, there's an implicit demand. Lo b'shamayim, and the Gemara says in Erevin, that's nun hey, not ayin daled. Nun hey, Gemara says in Erevin, and if it were b'shamayim, you'd have to go up to Shemayim and get it. If you chas v'shalom were sick with a disease and you knew the only cure were on the moon, you'd probably become an astronaut. So there's an explicit reassurance, but an implicit demand. So let me read from Rabbi Lichtenstein from the Sefer called Return and Renewal, which to me is this is the, if you really want to get Rabbi Lichtenstein, read this, but it's really hard to read. So if you've never been exposed to him, I'd read other things. If you have been exposed, every aspect of tshuva he sees as a prism for religion in general, Avodas Hashem, which makes it so fascinating. It's not, he starts with tshuva, then broadens out, this is reflective, and then digs back deep into tshuva. So he writes about this Gemara in Erevin, Nun Hey, contrary to the literal meaning of the pasuk, which implies that theoretically one would be exempt if it were beyond one's abilities, this pasuk indicates, based on the Gemara, there's no excuse, even if it's in the heavens and beyond the sea. In light of this understanding, the pasuk constitutes a factual statement that carries with it both an element of reassurance and a persistent and total demand. If it is in the heavens, you must strap on a parachute and retrieve it. Rav had these very cute lines. But the Ramban says, and Rav is actually writing based on the Ramban, but it's transferable. If you don't know like the Ramban, Ken mitzvah zos lo rechoka ila b'shamayim is not Torah, but tshuva. The Shavtat Hashem Elokecha, the Ramban counts as the pasuk which is mitzvah tshuva. The Rambam says it's on mitzvah tshuva. But it's the same thing. Tshuva can seem very intimidating, very frightening, especially if you go purist on yourself and perfectionist, because it's built into tshuva. You want to purify yourself, and how much is enough, and you'll always be left with residual tumah, and you'll always be left with residual hypocrisy, because you know you're not going to come through on all of your promises, and you could just loop yourself and push yourself into, ironically, a hopelessness and futility and fatalism about the tshuva. So Hashem is saying, Lo b'shamayim hi, which to me means find the best you can do the best tshuva you can, reach whatever level you can, and I promise you, I'll accept it. Tshuva leva tshuva aleichem. I know it's going to be imperfect. I know it's going to be laced with hypocrisy. I know that you're going to fall short on your commitments. I know that you're a human being, but I'll accept you as a human being because you don't live b'shamayim. This is my interpretation of the pasuk, but the basic pasuk is reassuring us that as daunting as Avodas Hashem in general, if that's the way you read the pasuk, Rashi, or as daunting as tshuva is, Ramban, if that's the way you read the pasuk, Hashem's telling us lo b'shamayim, lo me'v'le'am, kikor v'lecha hadavar me'od b'ficha u'v'lvavcha lasoso. So in your moment of doubt, whether you can, whatever that can is, Hashem is saying you can, and I put it there. Who made my mouth? Who made my heart? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's kikor v'lecha davar b'ficha u'v'lvavcha. Hashem is saying, I stacked the deck for you. I know you think it's free will, but I created a world in which you can find me and find what you need from me and with me easier than you may think. So as tshuva comes, don't forget to forgive yourself. Demand from yourself, but also forgive yourself. Because if you want Hashem to forgive you, you have to forgive yourself as well. And not just forgive yourself about the past. This is really the key line. Don't just forgive yourself about your past mistakes. Forgive yourself about your imperfect tshuva that you're about to commit. Because it won't be perfect. Try your hardest. And don't get all wrapped up why it isn't perfect. Hashem will forgive your past chataim, and Hashem will forgive and accept whatever tshuva you're able to achieve. Being that this is Parshas Nitzavim, so this is Erev Rosh Hashanah, I want to wish everyone who's watching this video a kasiva v'chasima tova for Am Yisrael keep in mind all the brokenhearted in Eretz Yisrael who hear Shvarm Teruah in their hearts every day of the year. They don't need a shofar to remind them how tzibrachan and broken our people are. They hear it every day of their lives. And keep them in mind when you hear the shofar. Daven for our chayalim, our chatufim, our ptsuim. Of course, the Kadosh Baruch Hu should be Hofad B'Hadar Go Lezecha, Hakol Yishrei Tev Elotzecha, Yomar Kol Asher Neshama B'Yapo, Hashem Elokei Yisrael Melech Malchusa V'Kol Moshala, Yad Be'Amim Tachtenu, U'Lemim Tachas Raglenu, Yivchal Ev Zach L'Seinu, Es Ke'on Yaakov, Asher Ohev Selah. Ksiva Chesima Tova.